What advice would you give to someone who's hoping to add test automation skills to their repertoire?
My first advice would be don't just watch video tutorials, because I think some people call it the tutorial hell, where you just buy a lot of tutorials from Udemy, from Pluralsight, and then you accumulate a lot of these video tutorials. And after you've watched one, you're not really applying what you've learned, because especially with test automation, it's like riding a bike. You can't just read about it. You really have to try and ride the bike, because that's how we can learn. So if there's a way for you to try to practice what you've learned and try to be consistent about it, I think that would really help, because I think you can build it as part of your positive habits, where maybe you can allot like even 30 minutes a day, or if you want like an hour a day, just to sort of find something. So there's a lot of example websites out there that you can use, not just for by automation, but you can also use it for API testing. You can use it for visual testing, for accessibility testing, if you also want to automate that. So you really just have to practice and be consistent about it. The next advice that I would probably give is try to break it down into smaller and manageable chunks. And I think this is why, so for me, what I try to do with, things that I need to learn is I try to break it down into smaller objectives. And if that objective is still a bit big for me, then again, try to break it down a bit more. So rather than, I guess, having an objective of by the end of this week, I should be able to create a framework using different tools, what you can do is you can break that down into, okay, without using a framework first, how can I write a very basic, simple test? And then you can then have another task wherein you can try to refactor that test so that that's duplicated, for example, are refactored. And then the next objective would be, okay, how can I then convert this into a framework, for example? So try to break it down into smaller chunks as much as possible. And the next advice is, if you're stuck, just really ask for help. What really helped me with my career was, and I think before, because obviously when we were back at the office, it was much easier because you can just go into your colleague's desk, you can do pair programming, you can ask questions. Oh, why did you do this, instead of like using it as a variable, for example. So try to do a lot of that. And I think now we're well adopted as well into doing that remotely. So you can use, so if you're using VS Code, for example, they have a feature called Live Share where you can really use it for pair programming. So you can easily see, I guess, what changes someone is making into your code. So there's much more better ways now if you want to do pair programming remotely. But yeah, if you're really stuck, don't just try and find the solution yourself. So if there's other people that you can ask like any help on, then lean on them and learn from what they are trying to teach you. And then after that, try to use that learning and try to do it yourself, because programming is something that, I guess, if you're trying to learn test automation, you really have to start with the basics as well. So if there's things that would benefit, for example, in you trying to ask other people, especially developers, then, use that benefit.
Now, I've heard people talk about like what you should automate, what you should not automate, and why. But then how can someone actually learn this?
Yeah. So one model that I've actually been introducing to my team members is Christine Jacquevine's test automation wheel. So I find that as a better sort of replacement rather than telling them about the test automation pyramid, because at least with the test automation wheel, you can see what sort of tests can be automated and on what level as well. So for example, if you're working on a pretty front-end application, most of the time we tend to just focus on the functional test. But if you use the test automation wheel as a guideline, you can also automate things like the visual component part. You can also automate accessibility. So there's actually lots of free tools out there that you can use. So if you're just looking at the test automation pyramid, it doesn't really say what you should automate. It tells you that if you automate as close to the code, then that will be faster on, that will really provide a faster feedback. But then it doesn't say, okay, if I want to add visual tests, how can I automate that? So I would probably ask, people just to really learn about what the test automation wheel is and how that can help them, because I really found it valuable. Another resource that I've watched in the past and I've tried to apply it to my work is Julia Pottinger. I hope I pronounced her name correctly, but she did this video. It's like a guide on creating a test automation strategy.